above the grey fog, Klein leaned back into his high-back chair and held creeping hunger. He remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he released the psychiatrist's soul according to the specific steps. A tall figure quickly appeared by the side of the bronze table. It was a woman whose face looked somewhat blurry. Her pain and distorted feelings was apparent. Klein looked at her and asked her as though he was chatting with her, "Do you still remember who you are?" In the mysterious space, he could directly channel her spirit. The psychiatrist's enmity reduced substantially as she smiled bitterly. "Of course, I remember. I was a member of a secret organization and was planning to meet a friend in Tuscarora Island, but I ended up encountering pirates on the way. Although I used my powers to resolve the disaster, the pirates who escaped informed Kilangos of the corresponding situation. In order to obtain my powers, he deliberately changed course and intercepted our ship. You can probably imagine what happened after that. Thanks to his meticulousness, I was killed instantly, unlike the other female passengers who encountered things that were worse than death." Klein fell silent for a few seconds before nodding slightly. "Do you know of the ancient book known as Grisel's Travels?" He believed that since Grisel's travels came from the dragons, it was possible that the psychiatrist had heard of its name or the corresponding information. The female psychiatrist thought over it carefully before shaking her head. "I'm sorry, I've never heard that name before." Klein no longer bothered with the topic and switched to asking, "Since you're about to dissipate and gain eternal peace, do you have any last wishes?" The psychiatrist lowered her head and chuckled. "I wish to be revived, all right. I know that this wish cannot be satisfied. Everything else isn't necessary. I've been dead for years. My family and friends have probably already received news of my death. Informing them again of my death will only dig up the pain of those memories. Let's leave it at that, thank you. That should be it." Her figure quickly dissipated and vanished, leaving behind a huge golden iris that could expose the thoughts of everyone's hearts. This was the beyond characteristic of a psychiatrist. Klein sighed and began pondering over the details of what the psychiatrist had said. She was visiting a friend at Tuscarora Island alone without any family. Tuscarora Island is located at the easternmost front of the Sonia Sea, and it's south of the Gargas Archipelago. That's the easternmost colony of the Loan Kingdom, while the Gargas Archipelago belongs to the Fisak Empire. What kind of friend would be there? What kind of friend is worth visiting after taking such a long trip? Although she only said that she's from a secret organization, the chances are that it's the psychology alchemists. Was she out on a mission? Klein respected the deceased and didn't wish to dig out her secrets, so he didn't probe deeper. Without any clues, he quickly stopped thinking about such matters and considered something else. After hunting down Ormtung Merthyr King, regardless of the reason, I have to leave Bayam for the time being. I've really done quite a bit in the City of Generosity during this period of time, yes. I'll participate in about 3 Beyond gatherings and confirm whether there are the main ingredients of Nimbrite Master before leaving. Klein rapidly made a decision and conjured a scene of the world praying, covering it with the grey fog. He threw the scene to the Crimson Star representing Miss Justice. Audrey was standing on the balcony on the 3rd floor looking at the nearby village. The rooftops were mainly brick red in color as they showed depictions, abstract pictures, or real pictures of dragons. Suddenly, the familiar endless void surfaced in front of her eyes. Amidst the grey fog, a blurry figure was standing high above, praying to the god above. "Honorable Mr. Fool, please inform Miss Justice that she can make preparations for the transaction." "I can make preparations for the transaction?" He has obtained the beyond characteristic of a psychiatrist. But he still didn't have one yesterday. The world's efficiency shocked Audrey as she nearly forgot to thank Mr. Fool. Thankfully, she was no longer the green and naive lady from before. She had been exposed to several major matters and rapidly calmed her mind as she sincerely thanked him. She passed on the message for Mr. World to wait another 2 to 3 days as she was preparing to pay off the money she owed to Mr. Fool's Blessed. Although she had sufficient money, she had to maintain a minimum balance, otherwise it was easy for others to notice something amiss. After the illusory grey fog dissipated, Audrey silently looked down at Susie, who was admiring the garden on the 1st floor, before pacing around and secretly clicking her tongue. Mr. World is really terrifying. Evening, in the seaweed bar. Having just squandered all his money at the casino, Blue Eyes Meath sat before a bar counter and ordered a cup of anti-bluff. He was just about to raise the cup when he suddenly heard the bartender whisper to him with a suppressed voice, "Ormtung Merthyr is dead." What, who did it? Blue Eyes Meath was first alarmed before he asked excitedly, "Someone is challenging Vice Admiral Ailment." An adventurer named Gemman Sparrow. He wasn't known at all before. Who knew that he finished off Merthyr? The bartender didn't hide his shock and alarm. He also killed Ozil, the real boss of a Mirris Leaf bar, Strong and Ozil. Blue Eyes Meath was just about to sigh when he frowned suddenly. Back when Ozil's men came to ask him about blazing the nits, he had mentioned that the bosun of the Golden Dream was seen mixing in with an unknown adventurer. He had used a ritual to provide the corresponding portrait. Ozil is dead. Merthyr King is dead. It's done by an unknown adventurer named Gemman Sparrow. Blue Eyes Meath suddenly trembled as a scene that left a deep impression on him surfaced in his mind. The young man that looked like a gentleman was standing by the entrance of the bar. He had black hair and brown eyes, with a thin and cut face. His eyes coldly observed the customers as though he was seeking out his prey. Blue Eyes Meath shuddered and couldn't be bothered with drinking his alcohol. He got up immediately and took wide strides out of the bar. Terrifying. That guy is too terrifying. Even Ormtung died at his hands. He's definitely a powerhouse at the Admiral level. He will definitely seek me out and finish me off. No, I can't stay in Bayam any longer. I have to return to the ship and be far away from here. Blue Eyes Meath ran to the Red Theatre and forcibly pulled his companions with him. They headed for the woods and circled around to the private harbour ran by the Resistance. Opposite across the Red Theatre, the herb store in the alley remained open. The chubby apothecary, Dark Will, was sitting behind the counter, wearing a calm expression, but internally, he was deeply worried. He had already contacted the Life School of Thought members he knew by various methods and sought their help. However, he had no idea who they were or when they would come. He could only bear with his fear and anxiety as he continued running the store, pretending as though nothing had happened. Dark Will, you're extremely uneasy. The chubby owl flew over from an unknown location and landed on the counter. There's no need for you to remind me. I know my state of mind very well. Dark Will waved his hands impatiently. He could still remember the times when he was still under his teacher's tutelage. He was often warned to be careful of the official Beyonder organizations and be careful of the true sanguine. In regards to this, Roy King raised several examples, such as being imprisoned underground forever, with no sunlight or woman to be seen. Being made into experimental subjects where their bodies would be used to test the dangers of particular sealed artifacts. There, they would experience all kinds of experiments, and after mutating, they were monsters who acted on instinct. It was also possible to be sucked and eaten by the sanguine and made into puppets. These examples had deeply imprinted themselves in his mind. It made his already lacking courage vanish instantly. After leaving his teacher's side, he often stayed in a city for a short period of time, immediately leaving once there was a risk of exposure. Darkwill tried hard to keep his horror under control, placing his attention on the problem of rescuing his teacher. Old Man has been captured for some time. Why is he still imprisoned in the Governor General's office? With the military's abilities, they should be able to gather any information they wish to know. Be it an outright execution, the gathering of materials, or being used as an experimental subject, they would definitely move Old Man. Could it be that Old Man used some techniques to hide his secret? Or they wish to make him into a spy? Sigh just agreed to it. Darkwill scratched his head as his thoughts wandered aimlessly. Gradually, he recalled the last letter he received from his teacher, Roy King. Old Man often likes to give hints in things that seem to be normal and ordinary matters. Could that letter contain similar information? That letter didn't say a thing. It just said to meet him near the Red Theatre and flaunted his gambling techniques. Pyre, he clearly relies on luck. He even wanted me to go to Enmad Street's Mabel's Sundry store and buy a dye to make preparations to be educated. I thought I would buy it only after we met, so I haven't been there all this time. Perhaps there's a secret there. Darkwill was like a drowning man who seemed to clutch at a straw. Many of Bayan's streets were named after Lowen Kingdom cities. Darkwill used a few minutes to muster his courage, brought the owl with him, and closed the door to his shop before walking out of the alley. While waiting for the rental carriage, he bought a copy of the news report from the paperboy as he flipped through the international and domestic news, as well as news about the archipelago. Suddenly, he saw a familiar face. It was the adventurer who had informed him of Roy King's location. In the afternoon, Gem and Sparrow killed Ormtongue Merthyr King, whose worth the bounty reaching £5,400. I actually entrusted a mission to such a powerful adventurer. Darkwill clicked his tongue. He soon threw the matter to the back of his mind and got onto the carriage and headed straight for Enmad Street and found Mabel's Sundry store. The owner of the shop was a genial old lady who said after sizing him up, "The dye you want costs £1. This is a robbery. Darkwill roared angrily in his head, but this only made him more certain that there might be clues hidden in the dye. After paying, he received a tiny ring box and opened the lid. He saw a milky white six-sided die which had 4 red dots pointing up. Although he was puzzled with how ordinary the die looked and how it was stuffed tightly into the ring box with no remnant space, Darkwill still acted cautiously by not studying it on the spot. He placed it into his pocket and walked to another side of the street. When he came to a secluded spot, he couldn't help but give it a glance, unable to find any problems with it. At this moment, a carriage flew by and gave him a fright. His wrist trembled as he dropped the die on the ground. The die continued rolling and ultimately came to a stop, a single red dot pointing up. Darkwill cursed the carriage driver and widened his stride to pick it up. Just as he took this step, his body suddenly staggered, and he collapsed to the ground loudly despite the lack of any obstacles. All he saw were stars. His mind went blank for a moment as he lay there, the milky white die right in front of his eyes. Darkwill sprawled on the ground, momentarily forgetting to stand up. His mind remained blank. Ever since he had matured, he had never encountered a scenario where tripping himself. After consuming the potions, his body had experienced enhancement to a certain degree, making it even more impossible. Now, for some baffling reason, he had fallen down in an inexplicable manner. Did I step on something? Darkwill suddenly snapped to his senses as he struck down with his palm and rolled to his feet. He pretended as though the one who had just fallen wasn't him. He looked left and right without finding anything odd on the ground. Filled with puzzlement, he took a few difficult steps forward to pick up the milky white die. At this moment, a patrolling constable seemed to have sensed the disturbance as he jogged over with baton in hand while holding his other hand down on his revolver. Upon seeing this scene, Darkwill suddenly felt worried, feeling suspicious that he had fallen for a trap. They caught Old Man but haven't come for me all this time. It's because they were secretly observing me and waiting for me to find some clues. Now, I've gotten my hands on this strange die, they've started taking action. The official Beyonders are here to catch me. Darkwill instinctively turned around and ran, but he had suffered a rather heavy fall, causing him to feel pain in his knees. He was momentarily only able to walk. Seeing the patrolling constable approach him, and with him not being able to run, a scene of an underground prison instantly surfaced in Darkwill's mind. In an environment with only an everlasting candlelight, locked with Beyonders who would feel intensely like monsters. What happened? The patrolling constable pressed down on his revolver as he kept his distance and asked cautiously. Darkwill suddenly felt an irrepressible fear. As his wrist trembled, the milky white die he had just picked up fell to the ground again as it rolled a few times. This time, 6 red dots pointed up. Faced with the constable's scrutiny, Darkwill replied with a trembling voice, "I just stepped onto a damn banana skin and fell." The moment he said that, he felt his heart skip a beat. This was because there wasn't any banana skins on the ground. Damn it, I was too nervous. I should have said that I tripped myself, Darkwill thought in frustration. He decided to summon the owl perched on the roof opposite him, preparing to make a last stand. The patrolling constable gave him a glance and chuckled. "Make sure to watch where you place your feet when walking. I was imagining that you had been robbed." He released his palm on his revolver, raised his baton, and walked away. In a daze, Darkwill looked at the constable's back that was opening up a gap from him. He wasn't sure how the constable had so easily believed his excuse that was filled with mistakes. He retracted his gaze and looked at the milky white die which was sitting on the ground in silence. He slowly frowned. "I'm not pure Ornese. The constables here don't need to suck up to me. Could it be all thanks to this? Be it my strange fall or my weird way of convincing the constable, it was all because of this. Is this that important sealed artifact which teacher was taking care of?" Darkwill quickly made certain connections as he carefully proceeded forward. He picked up the die again and stuffed it into the extremely tiny ring box. In the box, the die had no room to roll. Signaling to his owl, Darkwill picked up the news report copy, stopped a rental carriage, and hobbled up. His destination, Red Theatre. The carriage smoothly proceeded forward. Because dusk was setting in, the street lamps which were relatively far away didn't illuminate the area much. He wasn't in a rush to study the ring box or the die inside. He patiently waited until he returned home. After entering the herb store and heading up to the residential area on the 2nd floor, he lit the wall lamp and chased the silly bird out of his room. He sat in front of his desk and repeatedly checked on the ring box and milky white die. Finally, he took out a folded piece of paper about the length of a finger segment from the bottom of the ring box. Darkwill inhaled silently as he quickly spread open the piece of paper and discovered that there were 3 paragraphs written in ancient Fisak. "If I didn't appear 3 days after the appointed time, then I must have been betrayed and have been arrested. Therefore, do not seek out help from the other members of the School of Thought. This is because I'm unable to determine who did it. This will bring you great danger. There is only one thing that you need to do. Bring the die to Orabai Island and hand it to the bellman, Carnot, in the port city. My teacher, Rick Shadow, is hidden there. The subsequent matters will be handled by him. Don't worry that I'll divulge this secret. Once I finish writing this letter, all relevant memories would completely disappear. I wouldn't even remember having an apprentice like you until I'm rescued. Remember, try your best not to use the die. It has living characteristics. The more you use it, the easier it is for it to awaken. It will roll itself when you aren't watching it, even without any space. When it's at 1, please trust me when I say that you'll suffer from worse than a direct death. This is because almost everything you do will end in failure, including your bed activities. Indeed, this die is very dangerous. Dark will subconsciously sigh and immediately realize the dumb act he had done out of goodwill. In order to rescue his teacher, Roy King, he overcame his cowardliness and remained in Bayam, as well as sent out a cry for help to the Life School of Thought members. And according to the information, this meant that he might very well have been targeted by the person who betrayed Roy King. Why didn't you say so earlier? No, why didn't I head out to buy the die earlier? Darkville raised his hands and yanked at his hair. He didn't dare stay any longer. He decided to leave his residence and buy a scout ticket at night. He would head for Rabbi Island early the next morning. That was an island that was on the route between the Roasted Archipelago and Tuscarta Island. My charms, my revolver, my bullets. Darkville quickly counted the items that could provide him with safety, feeling concern over his lack of combat strength. He quickly thought of an idea as he paced around and mumbled, I need to hire a bodyguard. A bodyguard? Who should I hire? How much money must I spend? Amidst his thoughts, Darkville's gaze swept across the news report copy which he had just brought back. Suddenly, he thought of an excellent bodyguard, Gemman Sparrow. A powerful adventurer who could hunt a pirate worth £5,400. If he's willing to accept the mission, I should be able to successfully arrive at Rabbi Island if the councillor doesn't take action. How can I find him? Right, I should paste notices in the bars where adventurers frequently appear. Darkville nodded indiscernibly as he stuffed the items back into his packed suitcase. With this plump owl, he left the herb store once again, his heart feeling the pinch. In the seas beyond the Roasted Archipelago, in a small port belonging to Loan, the Black Death was docked there without any scruples. It was being surrounded by 3 ships. Vice Admiral Aylman Tracy, who had just taken a hot bath, wore a loose man's shirt, and she finished the final treatment for her mostly recovered wound. To a Demonis, scars weren't a thing. At this moment, the blonde female attendant knocked on the door and entered the captain's cabin after receiving permission. When she saw Tracy, her cheeks flushed red as she moved her gaze away. Captain, a telegram was sent from Bayam to the port over here. Merthyr, our third mate, has been killed. Tracy stopped her actions as her expression sank. She asked hesitantly, do you know who did it? She had sent Ormtung Merthyr to Bayam to investigate the assassination attempt on her, firstly as a form of punishment for his dereliction of duty, and secondly, to spread the news that she was heavily injured so as to lure others who harbored malicious intent into attacking her. She never expected Merthyr to be able to make any breakthroughs or developments in a short period of time. After the demigod addressed as Death Consul by the Demoness of Vanaging visited her, she had deliberately concealed this matter and didn't quickly inform Merthyr. She allowed the punishment to continue as she felt that it was naturally for the best if his investigations turned fruitful. Even if there was nothing, she wouldn't be too disappointed either. She never thought about the possibility of Merthyr being placed at risk, as it was a part of the punishment. But to her surprise, Merthyr had been killed so quickly. The blonde female attendant handed over the telegram and said it was done by an adventurer named Gemman Sparrow. It can be confirmed that he had used a beyond a power similar to Dragon's Might. Gemman Sparrow, Dragon's Might, hey hey. Kilangos also knew Dragon's Might. He likely grazed a psychiatrist or hypnotist with creeping hunger, Tracy sneered after receiving the telegram as she spoke to herself. She was quite certain that Gemman Sparrow was the enemy who had disguised himself as Helen to attack her. Furthermore, he had been using the faceless powers which Kilangos had grazed. Creeping hunger is with him, and he has an ancient demigod, whom Mother addressed as Death Consul, backing him. Does this mean that Kilangos was really killed by that Death Consul? Tracy muttered silently as she waved her hand to send the blonde attendant out. After the door to the captain's cabin closed, she chuckled to herself. If I were to divulge this information, the organization that ordered Kilangos to assassinate Duke Nigan would definitely be very interested. For a brief moment of time, she really had the urge to do so, but her rationality stopped her. This was because it meant that she would directly offend the Death Consul. And with the single chance of him being recognized as the murderer, she would immediately be suspected of divulging the information. When the time comes, unless I hide back at Mother's side, I'll be under the shadow of death at any moment. I'm not afraid of other saints. They will have to find me before they can attack me. Besides, there will definitely be some indication of that, and a significant amount of time is needed. I will have sufficient chances to escape danger, but the Death Consul can travel using the spirit world. As long as he determines my location, he will quickly appear beside me. Tracy bit her lip as she thought in depression. She gave up her previous thoughts and decided to take note of Gemman Sparrow's whereabouts. She wouldn't spare him once a good opportunity arose. At this moment, Klein was still living in the Tina Inn, waiting for his bounty to be delivered to him. 10 p.m. Swordfish Bar. After waiting an entire afternoon and having not received his bounty, Klein deliberately went out. He went towards Kent and received the news that the process had been kick-started. However, he would only receive the money tomorrow morning. He disguised himself and participated in a private exchange among the adventurers in the Swordfish Bar, but he didn't find the main ingredients of the Nimblite Master Potion or any mystical items. After restoring his appearance, Klein pressed down on his hat and attempted to squeeze through the crowd. He left the bar, which was in its rowdiest and noisiest time of the day. At this point, gazes swept past his face as most of them were momentarily taken aback before they clearly froze for 2 seconds, as though they had recognized something. Suddenly, they retracted their gaze and retreated far away from Klein like the receding tide. They had already learned of Gemman Sparrow's appearance and strength in the papers and rumors. More details had gradually spread in areas where adventurers, pirates, and gang members gathered. Many people gained a basic understanding of the present situation and knew that Gemman Sparrow had taken the crazy action of instantly drawing his revolver once he discovered Ormtung Merthyr King. Therefore, everyone knew better and chose to stay away from the dangerous man. The merchant, Ralph, was drinking in front of the bar when he suddenly sensed the disturbance. He instinctively half-turned his body around and looked over. He soon saw a quiet gentleman with a thin face and cut features, and the corresponding portrait which appeared on news reports surfaced in his mind, Gemman Sparrow who hunted Ormtung. Following that, Ralph recalled his conversation with Resistance leader, Kalat, in the evening. He confirmed that the crazy adventurer before him wasn't averse to see God, and he had even witnessed the private trade between the Resistance and Vice Admiral Iceberg. Perhaps I can develop him into being a believer of sea God even if he has no interest in the archipelago in the future. He might be able to provide certain help in certain matters. Ralph clasped his hands and held them to his mouth as though he was blowing at a sea conch. This was one of the gestures used to pray to sea God call virtue. Then, he suddenly got up and walked to Gemman Sparrow with a beer in hand. At this moment, Klein also noticed Ralph's approach and recognized him. That was a devout believer who was willing to offer up a third of his 20,000 gold pound wealth to sea God. That was the former pirate and the present merchant who he had convinced to set up a children's charity foundation. Based on the news regarding the charity foundation and his frequent pious praying, he understood Ralph in all aspects. Therefore, he was very puzzled as to why the man would attempt to approach Jem and Sparrow. He has a job to entrust to me. Things that the resistance isn't able to do for some reason or another. Klein looked at Ralph as he slowed down his pace. Mr. Jem and Sparrow, Ralph raised the cup of beer in his hand. Klein nodded and maintained his persona by saying, I don't know you. Ha ha, it's always so simple to get to know each other among adventurers. Perhaps a cup of beer is all it takes. Ralph pointed at the bar counter. Are you interested in a drink? All right. Klein was deeply puzzled as he answered simply. They sat in the corner of the bar as he ordered a cup of Southville beer. As he drank, he looked at Ralph without saying a word. Being stared at silently by a powerhouse at the level of a pirate admiral wasn't a good experience. Ralph drank a mouthful of beer to hide his high-strung nerves and laughed. I've heard about you. Before what you did today, I know that you're a true gentleman that shows no discrimination towards the natives of the colonial lands. Different things to say flashed through Klein's mind as he finally decided on a few sentences that corresponded to his persona. Get to the meat of the issue. Ralph nearly choked as he cleared his throat. Do I have the honor to introduce you to our god, the savior of the archipelago, the blessed of the sea, Call Vetchu? As you know, the sea is so vast. The storms are terrifying. It's impossible to guarantee that one can defeat the various difficulties at sea and live on, even for the four kings. We need a god that can respond to you and hold authority over the sea and storm. Introducing me to myself and then getting me to believe in myself, Klein resisted the urge to twitch the corners of his face as he turned to say, I'm more interested in whether you have any mystical items, the kind that has powerful offensive strength. Ralph revealed an honest smile. We don't have any. However, as long as you piously believe in sea god, there might be a day when you would be bestowed with one. I don't have one, don't make promises for me. Klein instantly found it amusing and laughable. He felt that he couldn't carry on the conversation. Hence, he downed his half-filled cup of Southville beer and said, I'll consider it. He was about to leave when the bartender suddenly came over and squeezed a smile. Mr. Jem and Sparrow, someone entrusted you with a mission. What is it? Klein glanced at Ralph. Knowing his place, the latter left his seat with his beer. He was already very pleased with today's outcome. This was because Hinva had the intention of developing the crazy adventurer into a believer of sea god in one try. His goal was only to let him know of the possibility and to think about the pros and cons of doing so. After the silence in the corner of the bar resumed, the bar counter immediately said with a smile, he says he's an apothecary, you know. He has a mission to entrust to you. If you're interested, you can wait here for him. We will contact him with the previously established method. An apothecary I know, the chubby Dark Will. The Dark Will who rears a plum owl. What kind of mission would he have for me? Rescue his teacher, Roy King. That isn't something I will do. The risk is just too high. As his thoughts raced, Klein decided to first figure out the details of the mission. Okay, at nearly 11 p.m., Klein met the apprehensive Dark Will in billiard room 3 of the Swordfish Bar. He had already changed into a rather eye-catching witch doctor robe and was dressed as a native. He was in a Taropa shirt, pantaloons, and a brown jacket. As for this round-faced owl, it was perched silently on his right shoulder, observing the adventurer with his penetrating eyes. It's very similar to the feeling of how Miss Justice observes the other members of the Tarot Club. This owl might really be beyond a creature. A spectator, Klein made a judgment as he said in a deep tone without a change in expression, what mission is it that you have? It's this. The chubby apothecary kept his left hand in his pocket and clenched the ring box tightly. I'll be making a trip to another island. Hey, it will probably take 3 days. Due to certain developments, I might encounter danger. Of course, it might not happen as well. In short, I need a bodyguard, and I think you're the best choice. The way you put it sounds like I'm actually not that impressive. It's just that you know a few people you aren't rescuing your teacher and have chosen to leave Bayam to seek out helpers. Or he has already been saved and the danger comes from the military's pursuit. Klein pondered over the truth behind the matter as he calmly asked, how great would the danger be? Darkville's lips trembled as he said, I can't be sure. If the danger exceeds what you can handle, you can directly hand me over to the other party. This will be a promise we make now. It will not spoil your reputation. If I didn't know that you just have a nasty mouth, then I would have imagined this as a form of goading. Klein thought and said, what kind of payment can you provide? Dark Will originally wished to directly give the answer he had considered long ago, but he felt hesitant for a moment. This was because the matter was indeed very dangerous. Without enough chips, he couldn't move Jem and Sparrow into agreeing. He was afraid of the appearance of the counselor, and that before the matter reached a level of despair, his bodyguard would give up resisting. This was also the reason why he had to hire a powerhouse. Klein glanced at him and coldly said, you can first consider it for a moment. I'll use the washroom. Tell me your answer when I'm back. With that said, he turned around and walked to the door. Pulling the handle, he stepped outside. The way he responded made him seem experienced, having the coolness and coldness of an adventurer and bounty hunter, but in fact, he wasn't really giving the chubby apothecary time to think. He was only finding an opportunity to head to the washroom to divine the matter above the grey fog. This was key to whether he accepted the mission. Once he left the billiard room and arrived in front of the washroom, he got in line before finally getting an empty cubicle. When he entered, he frowned as the dirty environment and disgusting stench left him grossed out. He nearly turned his head and left. He held back his disgust as he pulled the flush lever in contempt. As he sighed at the terrible environment for his divination, he took 4 tiny steps counterclockwise and began the ritual. Inside the billiard room, Dark Will agilely went to close the door after he saw Jem and Sparrow's back completely disappear. He asked the owl on his shoulder, will he betray me? No, the owl mumbled. Also, when asking me questions, be polite. Call me Mr. Harry. The fat on Darkville's face trembled. Mr. Harry, what kind of payment do you think he will accept? I can't see through him. He's good at concealing his emotions, the owl said frankly. Darn Mr. Harry. No, darn silly bird. Darkville cursed inwardly as he paced around and considered the chips he could offer. After a while, Klein returned to billiard room 3 and asked, have you thought it through? He had already divined above the grey fog that the mission's danger was acceptable, and he happened to plan on leaving Bayam for the time being. £800 for 3 days, as well as our friendship. I'm referring to the friendship of my teacher and his friends, Darkville said without confidence. Klein remained silent for a few seconds and said, £1,000 for 3 days. In addition, your organization needs to help me obtain a mystical item with powerful offensive abilities. I will pay in cash based on a reasonable price. £1,000. How could I have that much? Dark Will hesitated for a moment before saying, I'll pay an advance of £300. The rest will be paid by the person I'm looking for when we arrive at my destination. He planned on getting his teacher's teacher to pay the rest. Klein nodded slightly and said, deal. Dark Will immediately heaved a sigh of relief before puffing his face and said with a smile, "Can I believe that the protection is in immediate effect?" Upon hearing the chubby apothecary's question, Klein smiled inwardly as he wore a stoic expression. "From the moment you make the first payment." Dark Will didn't hesitate to take out a huge wad of cash as he counted it while his heart pained for the money. "Here's £300. You can carry out your promise." Klein received the notes and nodded. That wouldn't be an issue. Dark Will immediately felt relieved, as though he was a drowning person who had finally caught on to a float. Half an hour later, in the Tina Inn, Darkville watched in a daze as the powerful adventurer, Gemman Sparrow, said to the reception counter, "Switch us to a luxurious suite." With that said, Klein took 2 steps backward as though giving his spot to the chubby apothecary. Darkville gulped his saliva and asked hesitantly, "I'm paying." During the mission, all expenses are borne by the employer. "This is the rule adventurers follow," Klein said without a change in expression. "I'd be a dunce if I believed you. Am I to help you pay if you call for a few red theatre prostitutes?" Darkville thought as he squeezed out a smile. "We can use an ordinary room. This will make the protection job easier." "Then, you stay by yourself." Klein acted as Gemman Sparrow without any effort. Darkville laughed and walked to the counter and said without expression, "A luxurious suite." When Darkville finally checked in and entered the smaller bedroom, he opened the window and left an opening for the owl, Mr. Harry. He took out the ring box in his pocket and checked the situation of the strange die. After confirming that the die was the same as before, with 4 points facing up, Darkville gradually heaved a sigh of relief. Backland, inside an ordinary house. Sangwell woke up from his slumber, and the first thing he did was check on his body. This was something he had to repeat every day. This was because he had no idea what kind of story 0-08 would compose after he slept, bringing about unknown accidents. After confirming that he wasn't injured, Sangwell wore a pair of bright leather boots and stood up. Without any surprises, he saw 0-08 silently sitting on his desk as though it was an ordinary quill. However, it had been locked in a metal box that was covered with symbols and magic labels. Sangwell walked over with a heavy heart and grabbed 0-08. He flipped open the notebook beside him and discovered that there was another page of text. Sangwell couldn't recall what he had done last night, but he acutely sensed some problems. He looked into the mirror and found his reflection somewhat unfamiliar, as though his body had given birth to another Sangwell. He looked down and saw there were obvious abnormalities under his fingernails, but he couldn't recall what he had done the previous night no matter how hard he tried. After seeing this description, Sangwell instinctively looked at the full-body mirror in the room. He saw that he was still blind in one eye. His classic chiseled face didn't have a single wrinkle, but there was a smile lingering at the edges of his mouth. It formed a stark contrast with his heavy gaze. At this moment, Sangwell felt that his face was a little livid. He had eye bags, and it was matched with the smile he couldn't understand. He appeared sinister, vicious, and strange. He lifted his hands, lowered his head, and saw black stained blobs under his fingernails. It was as though he had spent half the night digging up roots in the garden. Although he had switched from the death pathway to the evernight pathway, and he had become a night watcher, Sangwell didn't lose the beyond the powers he had from before. He was still a powerful spirit guide in the domain of dead spirits. Therefore, he immediately planned to communicate with the spirits inside and outside the house to figure out what had happened last night. At this point, he saw the final passage on the notebook through the corner of his eye. Sangwell attempted to channel spirits, but sadly he realized that it was to no avail. It was as though a person of a similar profession had wiped out all clues. He was very worried, unaware of what he had embroiled himself with the previous night. Sangwell's expression turned heavy as he attempted to channel spirits. Within his expectations, he didn't receive any outcome which could be called a pleasant surprise. Wednesday morning, outside a Midas Leaf bar that had its shadow boss replaced. Klein circled around to a secluded alley and saw Oz Kent carrying a tiny suitcase. "Your bounty." Oz Kent threw the small suitcase over. This actually wasn't the bounty money in the true sense of the word. It was money the military had put forth. The former involved the Governor-General's office and the kingdom's finance ministry. The procedure was complicated and needed at least 3 days to complete. Klein caught the suitcase and opened it on the spot. He saw stacks of neatly arranged cash, with most of them in £1 or £5 denominations. A total of £5,400. "We didn't take a cut," Oz Kent said as he forced a smile. If it were any other adventurer, he would have given £4,000 at most. The rest was the income for the personnel involved in the entire procedure. But faced with the crazy man whose strength was close to a pirate admiral, all he could do was volunteer work thanks to his fear of being executed on the spot by him. "The military is unlikely to fool me with fake notes." Klein grabbed a stack of cash and waved it. £5,400 hiding outside the alley. Darkville heard Oz Kent's words and secretly shot a glance at the suitcase. The stacks of pound notes seemed to blind him. This was the first time he was seeing so much money placed together. An adventurer really is a profitable profession. Successfully hunting a pirate earns thousands of pounds. Protecting me nets him £1,000 in one request. Occasionally, he can find sunken ships and treasure. Why did I become an apothecary instead of an adventurer? If I had known, I would have chosen the lucky beyond the pathway. Darkville thought with atypical admiration. However, he quickly recalled his reality. Most adventurers didn't live such rich lives. Even if they could make a killing, a third of their income was given to apothecaries, either to treat their injuries and remove any latent injuries, or to buy medicine to add to the fun and deal with unmentionable diseases. It's still safer being an apothecary, Darkville sighed inwardly. At this moment, Klein, who had only did a rough count of the money, closed the suitcase and said to Oz Kent, "I'll be leaving Bayam for some time. If I have any intel, how should I inform you?" "You're leaving Bayam?" Oz Kent asked, finding it odd. Klein nodded slightly and said, "I received a bodyguard mission." Oz Kent was first enlightened before he felt a baffling sense of ease. If this madman were to stay in Bayam for long periods of time, there will ultimately be a day where he causes problems. "It's better to drift out at sea and fight those pirates," Oz Kent immediately said with a smile. "You can directly send me a telegram and include my address. We have people planted at the telegraph office." "All right." Dressed in a black tweed coat, Klein didn't speak further. With the suitcase in hand, he turned to leave the alley. He headed for the harbour together with Darkville and planned to catch the earliest liner to Oreva Island. The owl flew in between the trees and appeared furtively. They had already bought scalp tickets the night before. Half an hour before they boarded the ship, Darkville reeled with anxiety. He was afraid the person who had betrayed his teacher would suddenly rush over and attack him. This feeling continued until he entered the first-class cabin that belonged to him. As long as the liner went out into the sea, beyonders without flight capabilities or their own ships would find it difficult to intercept him. Quickly start the ship. Quickly start the ship." Darkville looked out the window as he muttered to himself. At this moment, the owl had followed and perched on his left shoulder. Klein sat on a chair in the room, prepared for any possible attacks. At this moment, the sky suddenly turned dark as the wind howled with increasing strength. The air's humidity also clearly climbed. A storm? Darkwill widened his mouth as he blurted out. This meant that the ship might not set sail at the scheduled time. It might be delayed for hours. And with that, Darkwill wouldn't be able to withstand many of the unnecessary risks. He turned his head to look at Gem and Sparrow and forced a smile. Do you have any solutions? I do have one. For example, you can immediately pray to see God call Vetchu, and I'll immediately answer your prayer above the grey fog. I'll disperse the storm, but it's without a doubt that in minutes, or maybe seconds, Sea King Jan Galtman will rush over. And his attacks will arrive earlier. Klein looked at the chubby apothecary and said calmly, I'm only an adventurer. Darkwill knew that he shouldn't have had any expectations. He cursed the weather silently and turned around, looking out the window to check on the exact situation. Boom! A silver bolt of lightning struck Darkwill before Klein could even react. Darkwill immediately collapsed, convulsing as smoke emitted from his body. His skin was charred as snakes of lightning buzzed. Klein nearly fell into a shock. This was the first time he was seeing someone getting struck by lightning during a storm. That's way too unlucky, right? He briefly forgot to rescue Darkwill. The owl, Mr. Harry, was similarly stunned for a few seconds before it screamed, Quick! Quick! There's a bottle of medicine in the second secret pocket on his left. Feed it to him. This owl can talk. Klein pricked up his brows, took a few steps forward, bent down, and found a bottle of blood-red medicine. Then, he poured it down Darkwill's throat. After a few minutes, Darkwill finally regained his senses. As charred black skin peeled off, he stood up with great difficulty. To deal with my wounds. He staggered to his room and locked the door. After doing all of that, he took out the ring box and opened it with a solemn look. In the ring box with almost no room to roll, the milky white die had already changed at some point in time. 2 red dots were facing up. In the living room outside, Klein stood on the spot and recalled everything that had happened before frowning. At this moment in time, he had a baffling feeling that the enemies he would face during this bodyguard mission was probably going to be different from the enemies he encountered in the past. After Darkwill partially recovered and came out, Klein sat on the chair and leaned forward slightly. Explain. This determines how I should provide you with protection. Upon hearing Gem and Sparrow, Darkwill's first reaction was to reveal everything about the strange die. He wanted this adventurer, that he had spent huge sums of money on, to grasp the problem at its root so as to effectively ensure his personal safety. But on second thought, he recalled his teacher's exhortations. Believing that the die might very well be a rather important sealed artifact of the life school of thought, he was afraid that the truth would entice him to cause even more negative developments. There are plenty of rumors about adventurers who killed their employers during missions in order to earn greater benefits for themselves. I don't know Gem and Sparrow, and I have no idea what kind of character he has. I need to be cautious. Besides, the die had automatically rolled a 2. The situation isn't at its worst and most despair-inducing. I can still wait for a chance. Darkwill hesitated for a few seconds and finally decided to talk about superficial matters while avoiding the key points. He subconsciously dodged Gem and Sparrow's seemingly calm eyes. It's this. My teacher and I belong to a secret organization. I'm escaping because a traitor has appeared internally. They grasped the pathway related to fate and can make themselves sufficiently lucky, and their target unlucky. I might have been cursed, so I was unlucky enough to be struck by lightning. After the explanation, he forcefully hid the nervousness in his heart and awaited Gem and Sparrow's reply. Will he believe me? This kind of adventurer with rich experience and strength is likely hard to deceive if he were to discover that I'm lying. He will likely sink me into the ocean. Darkwill stood there anxiously, like a student being summoned to the teacher's desk. He's indeed from the life school of thought monster pathway. Klein nodded in thought. I understand. Try to do as little as possible. I will consider how I'll deal with your bad luck. Darkwill was taken aback, completely unable to believe that Gem and Sparrow would so easily accept a lie he fabricated on the spot. He forced a smile and quickly expressed his gratitude. Then, he returned to his room, leaning his back against the door as he took out the ring box. His hand trembled as he opened the lid, only to discover that the milky white die had already strangely rolled itself to have the 6th side facing up. Does this mean that I was lucky enough to successfully fool Gem and Sparrow? Darkwill thought in enlightenment. Mr. Harry swooped down and didn't choose to perch on the chubby apothecary's shoulder. Apparently, it was still somewhat worried about how it could have also been implicated when Darkwill was nearly struck by lightning. It stood on a wooden desk and stared ahead with its round eyes. Darkwill, you're very nervous. You don't have to tell me that, Darkwill said in frustration. The owl spread its wings and said, all right, I'll use a different explanation. I believe I should consider changing owners. Gem and Sparrow seems to be a pretty good choice. Then what about me? Darkwill asked in surprise, momentarily forgetting his anger. Mr. Harry TSKD and said, don't you sense the concern and fear in your heart? You're already suspecting whether you can see tomorrow's sun. That strange die is really, really dangerous. If I were you, I would have thrown it out the window and into the sea and get your teacher's teacher to fish it out himself. How do you know about my teacher's teacher? Darkwill blurted out the question. Mr. Harry proudly lifted its head and said, don't doubt an owl's vision. Darkwill fell into thought and didn't faze himself with its answer. No, that won't work. Throwing the die into the sea wouldn't resolve all my problems. According to Old Man, even if it's buried out at sea, any powerful person will be able to find it in days. That will mean that I'll really lose it. Silly bird, you lack general knowledge in mysticism, and you don't know how some important sealed artifacts are just like the most popular prostitutes in Red Theatre. They'll always be able to attract hungry men. Including you, Harry calmly replied. As for the problem of being lacking in general knowledge in mysticism, I believe a famous quote can explain it. Emperor Cell once said that if a child doesn't receive a good education, then it's the father's fault. This sentence can also be used to describe problems between a pet and its owner. All right, Darkwill, regardless, I believe you need to discuss the die with Gem and Sparrow. Otherwise, there will only be greater danger. Let me wait and see a little longer. Perhaps it will be fixed at 6, Darkwill said with some hesitation. He sat on the edge of the bed before lying down. At this moment, the storm that had been howling had gradually calmed down. The sky began to turn calm as the liner blew its horn, indicating that it was setting sail. Inside the first-class cabin's living room, Klein looked out the window and saw blurry rainbows that appeared after the rain. Yet, his heart wasn't calm. He wasn't too afraid of enemies. Out at sea, apart from the 4 kings and the official demigods, all the pirate admirals who appeared with their fleet, there were very few matters that could threaten him. Who had creeping hunger and several mystical items. Even if the ship was sunk, he was able to escape thanks to the many charms he had from the sea god domain. But luck was something he really had no confidence in. It wasn't within the limits of his abilities, nor could he think of a way to handle it. Although my title is the King of Yellow and Black who wields good luck, that was modified from the luck enhancement ritual. And the luck enhancement ritual clearly wasn't to allow people to get out of bad luck. Darkville's matter is quite difficult to handle. I can only invest more effort into keeping a close eye on his situation. I'll immediately rescue him if something unlucky that can cause death happens. Let's hope that we can last for these few days until we arrive at Orabi Island. His seniors should be able to help him change his luck. Klein rubbed his temples, but he didn't show any abnormalities. Dark Will, who had been too nervous the previous night, fell into a deep sleep without realizing it. After a while, his stomach's growling informed him that it was time for lunch. He tried hard to open his eyes, but he felt as though an invisible person was pressing down on him, making it impossible for him to move. He felt the back of his head swelling with a sharp pain. He felt his breathing become more difficult as his heart raced at an abnormal pace. Then it told me that I'm going to experience a sudden death in my dreams. Dark Will struggled with all his might, but he failed to wake up. He became weaker and weaker with time. At this moment, his mouth was opened up by a sharp object as an ice-cold liquid was poured in. The liquid also flowed down his face, wetting his chin and neck. Dark Will's body recovered as he finally managed to open his eyes. He saw two bright, round, gold-like eyes nearly slamming into his head. Rearing a beyond a pet can be quite effective sometimes. Dark Will first felt wistful before he rapidly sat up and took out the ring box. Inside, the die had rolled to another side. 1 point. So unlucky that I almost died in my sleep. No, I don't think it's that simple. It seems to magnify certain probabilities such as the chances of being hit by lightning or the chances of experiencing sudden death while asleep. No, this can't carry on. If this continues, I'll definitely die. Dark Will thought in hysteria. Horror quickly overwhelmed his thoughts as he spurred his hand to hold on to the ring box and rushed to the door. Perhaps as a result of nearly suffering a sudden death, he was lacking in strength. He could hardly twist the handle. Help, help, Mr. Harry screamed sharply. Bang, the door was opened, slamming into Dark Will's head. If Klein hadn't controlled his strength, the chubby apothecary's head probably would have cracked open with blood spewing out everywhere. Without even rubbing his bruise, Dark Will frantically shouted, It's this. It's this. It's this die that gives me bad luck. When it's at one point, I'll fail at everything I do. He had already decided to inform Gemman Sparrow of the whole truth, and he looked forward to the powerful adventurer giving him some effective suggestions. He didn't eliminate the possibility of him killing him out of greed, but he had weighed the matter. If he had to make a choice, he definitely chose the one which wasn't as terrible. Telling Gemman Sparrow might lead to death, but not telling him would spell certain death. This choice was no longer something that needed consideration. I don't care if the die is lost. My life is more important, Dark Will thought with righteous indignation. Then, he saw a smile appear across Gemman Sparrow's mouth. Thank you for your humor. The joke isn't too bad. It's not a joke. Dark Will looked down at the ring box and saw that there were no changes to the blood-red single point on the die. See, could it be that even an explanation with plenty of logic will fail? The chubby apothecary suddenly fell into despair. It's real. He's speaking the truth. Harry flapped its wings. Dark Will, who felt hope arise in him, heard Gemman Sparrow say in a deep voice, Then why don't you throw it into the ocean? With that said, Klein politely closed the door and returned to the living room. This fellow must be hiding a secret. I mustn't be fooled by such a clumsy excuse. Klein sat in his chair and waited for Dark Will to describe the situation in detail. Dark Will sat down, depressed. He sat there motionless, afraid of encountering another failure. He didn't notice that the die had already switched its face again to a 3. Before lunch, Klein entered the washroom to clean out his digestive system. After washing his hands, he went above the grey fog in passing, preparing to browse through the prayers of the sea god believers. Just as he sat at the high-back chair of the fool, he suddenly recalled many details as his eyes widened. How could I believe such a weak explanation? Why do I think that it's because of that die? In the past 2 events, it felt like my mind had been clouded. No, it's not that. Dark Will's explanation happened to match certain theories of mine. Therefore, I instinctively believed it to be real and fake. Klein's eyes constricted as he thought about it. At that moment, he had already made a judgment. That die is indeed problematic. Above the grey fog, inside the palace that looked like a giant's residence, Klein tapped the edge of the mottled table as his thoughts revolved around the strange die. It can influence me without me realizing it. This is already somewhat similar to 0-08 from back then. It's just that one is right in front of me, while the other is hidden. It's definitely a sealed artifact, and it's the kind that exists at the very pinnacle. Even if it's not a grade 0, it has to be a very special existence among grade 1 second. I'm temporarily unable to interfere with matters regarding fate, but I can't just passively face it. With the passage of time, objects at the level of sealed artifacts will often cause more severe damage. It might begin to affect people around the chubby apothecary, such as me or all the passengers on the ship. Klein thought over the matter seriously without any solutions in mind. He decided to immediately return to the real world. He didn't know how to seal the die or how to reduce its influence, but he knew someone had a clue. It was the snake of Mercury, Willow Septin, who was still inside his mother's womb as a fetus. Entering the master bedroom, he took out the paper crane in his wallet and placed it on the table. Klein took a look at the surface, which still had signs of being erased. He picked up a pencil and wrote a simple question. How do I deal with that die? He folded the paper crane back to its original form, stuffed it in his wallet, and went to the door of the servants' room before knocking on it twice. This wasn't in violation of Gemman Sparrow's persona, because he was a gentlemanly madman. Of course, Klein was mainly afraid of bashing Dark Will to death by rashly opening the door. This was something that he had learned from the movie franchise, Final Destination. In addition, Klein was also worried about witnessing something disgusting or unpleasant. With the preferences Dark Will has exhibited, when he realizes that he's in extreme danger and unable to extricate himself from it, with waiting for death being the only option available to him, there's an 0 chance of him pleasuring himself to climax one last time. Klein lampooned as he heard the chubby apothecary's weak reply, What's the matter? It's good that you aren't dead. Yet Klein carefully opened the door and leaned his body a little forward, looking at Dark Will and the opened ring box which was sitting in front of him. He calmly asked, What's the score? Can't you check it from the papers yourself? Sports section. Dark Will remained listless. I'm asking about the die, Klein simply added. It's still at 3 points, Dark Will first answered instinctively before turning his head and jumping up. You believe me? Klein didn't reply so as to prevent him from recalling how Gemman Sparrow had been fooled by the die. He turned around and said in an unperturbed tone, Bring the die outside. All right, all right. Dark Will and Harry cried out in joy almost at the same time. They either raised their arms or wings. After the chubby apothecary carefully carried the ring box out, Klein pointed at the coffee table and said, Put it on there. As he said, he sat on the sofa beside it. He placed his arms on his thigh and leaned forward to observe the strange die. On the surface, the die didn't seem strange in any way when it came to mysticism. The only difference from an ordinary die was that it was dyed in red, even for 3 points. Klein didn't touch it out of caution. He slightly straightened his body and looked at Dark Will, who was seated across him on a chair, as well as the fat owl, Harry, who was perched on the chair's back. Describe the exact situation. Darkwill didn't hide the matter any further, as he said with a smile which looked worse than crying. This is an important sealed artifact in our organization. My mission is to send it to a particular person in Oravi Island. But, as you can see, it's extremely dangerous. It will roll itself even when there's no space for it to do so. When it rolls a 6, the wielder will be sufficiently lucky. Everything can be done with relatively easy success, just like how my clumsy lie was able to fool you. Don't mention this matter, you will one day be taught a serious lesson, because of that mouth of yours. Klein listened with a stoic expression. Darkwill continued. 1 point means that the wielder will be extremely unlucky. Nothing will succeed. You wouldn't believe me even if I were to tell you the whole truth. 2 points should be bad luck of a lesser degree, but as for why it will cause me to be struck by lightning, it's inexplicable. 3 points and 4 points are normal levels of bad luck and good luck. This can be confirmed. 5 points is the opposite of 2 points. You aren't considered unlucky enough. Otherwise, I would have already beaten you up. Klein thought and calmly instructed. From this moment forth, both of you will take turns to monitor this die. Once it drops below 3 points, you are to inform me immediately. Both of us. Darkwill wore a blank look for a moment. Including me. The owl perched on the edge of the chair's back raised its right wing. Klein leaned back into the sofa and crossed his right leg as he said calmly, this will help in maintaining focus and energy. With that said, he gestured at the owl with his chin. You're up first. My name is Harry, the owl grumbled. Harry. Klein resisted the urge to laugh as he said to Darkwill, pull the bell and get an attendant here. From this moment forth, we will choose to have room service for our meals. Before reaching Oravi Island, you have to be in the living room at all times. You are not to go anywhere. Even if you wish to use the washroom, it will be when it's at 3 or 4. If you really can't hold it in, I'll give you a bucket. Upon hearing Gem and Sparrow give instructions with regularity and thoroughness, Darkwill calmed down a little at a time. He was no longer as horrified as before. The matter he was most worried about prior to this was that firstly, Gem and Sparrow would be enticed by greed and choose to kill him for the die. Secondly, this somewhat crazy and cold adventurer might be frightened by the die, and that he would choose to terminate the mission and stop providing protection. And now, Gem and Sparrow didn't show any fear, and he even seemed very confident. Darkwill secretly sighed in relief and thought, his performance was really professional. He isn't afraid at all. He can even escape the influence of the die and accept my explanation. He lives up to his name of being the powerful adventurer who easily hunted Orm-Tongue. He's definitely a powerhouse at the pirate admiral level. Darkwill stood up and walked to the door to pull the service bell. Just as he returned to the sofa, he heard Harry's sharp screech. It has changed. It has changed. 2 points. Suddenly, Klein exerted strength in his legs as he rose up from the sofa without warning and rushed to Darkville's side. Bang! As a gunshot rang from outside, Klein pulled Darkville's arm, swung his arm backward, and shook his wrist, throwing the chubby apothecary to the side. At this point, in the wall opposite to where Darkwill was standing, there was a bullet hole. Did a sailor's gun misfire, or did the bullet ricochet when aiming at some seabird or something? Regardless of the situation, the chances of that happening are very low. Yet Klein turned his head to the chubby apothecary. Are you injured? Darkwill shook his head with a lingering sense of fear. I'm fine. In the time that followed, Klein resolved more than 10 accidents, one after another. It included the sudden collapse of the chandelier in the room, a hammer dropped by a slipping maintenance worker headed straight for Darkville's head, as well as Darkvill nearly dying from choking on a fishbone. These didn't seem like anything serious, but for Klein to remain highly focused, it was inevitable for him to be exhausted. Thankfully, the die automatically rolled to 4 points later, finally ending the hour which was fraught with disasters. No, I can't continue like this. Who knows if something will happen to me when I'm rescuing him. Klein sent away the captain who came to apologize and said to Darkwill, I'll sleep for half an hour. Both of you are to watch the die. Immediately wake me up when there's a problem. The chubby apothecary and the owl nodded like a hungry woodpecker. Leaning back into the sofa, Klein used cogitation to quickly fall asleep, hoping to receive reply from Will or Septin. When he woke up in his dream, he heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the pitch-black desolate plains. He followed the same old path and reached the depths of the black steeple. In the protruded ground surrounded by tarot cards, there were many new silvery lines that were densely written. Klein stopped walking and quickly read it. It's called the Die of Probability. It's a sealed artifact of the highest level in our school of thought. I believe it can reach the standard of a grade 0 sealed artifact. It controls the probability of everything. 1 point will maximize the probability of unfavorable matters occurring to the target. 2 points will raise the probability of unfavorable matters greatly. This doesn't mean that 2 points is safer than 1 point. This is because once the probability is high enough, any accident can happen. 3 points is to increase the probability of unfavorable matters. It's the opposite for 4 to 6 points. Even for me, a being who can reset it to a certain extent, it's a rather dangerous sealed artifact. A demigod can be killed using it, but of course, you can also kill yourself. I know, your contest with the Die of Probability is likely the equivalent to the battle between the God One of Save and Load and the RNG2 gods. Klein lampooned inwardly as he continued reading. The Die of Probability has living characteristics. It always makes the wielder swing back and forth between having good and bad luck. If one isn't careful, it's possible to die from an accident. When it awakens to a certain degree, it will control the people and objects around the wielder, controlling the probability of their actions. Although it hasn't been confirmed, I suspect that given enough time, it will be able to influence the entire world, making every action of all life be determined by its score. Of course, this is excluding deities. To put it simply, it's digitizing the entire world. This is definitely at the level of a grade 0 sealed artifact. It's extremely dangerous. How terrifying. Klein couldn't help but frown as he eagerly continued reading. To truly seal the Die of Probability is rather complicated. To put it simply, it's to use specific sealed artifacts to isolate it from the spirit world, astral world, and the real world. You can give it a try. Ha ha, I'll reveal my cards. I have long discovered that you can resist my prophetic senses. Perhaps you can use it to seal it. There's another way, but it can only briefly reduce its influence. However, this should be enough to send the Die of Probability to the hands of someone who can see it. That method is to use the fact that it has living characteristics. Use an effective method to intimidate it. That way, it will behave, calm down for a period of time. It will last about 12 hours before continuing. After repeated acts of intimidation, the influence it receives will decrease. After a week, it will mark you and madly control your probabilities. Finally, thank you for your help. Sincerely yours, Will Septin. As expected of a snake of fate. He has indeed discovered my uniqueness. Throwing the Die of Probability above the grey fog should be able to see it. But the problem is that a grade 0 sealed artifact with living characteristics might influence the space above the grey fog and chase me away. Making itself the owner, such matters cannot be answered with divination. It will definitely be able to resist, just like 0-08 Klein rejected the idea of using the grey fog. As the thoughts swirled in his mind, he suddenly had an idea. Klein quickly left his dream and woke up. He said to Darkwill, I have a method of suppressing its influence. What is it? Darkwill asked in pleasant surprise. Klein didn't answer and picked up the die of probability, which had 4 points facing up, before entering the washroom. What does he want to do? I remember that in some folklore, the way they treat evil objects is to throw SHD. Darkwill didn't wish to think further. After entering the washroom and locking the door, Klein immediately set up a ritual to summon himself. Following that, he went above the grey fog and brought out the iron cigar case. Then, he picked up the die of probability and opened the cigar case. Inside the cigar case was the old black eye, which came from the Nimblewright master. Under the darkness, Klein's face was cloaked in the shadows, and he watched with a deep and gloomy gaze as he brought the die of probability close to the strange eye. It was beyond the characteristic which contained the true creator's mental corruption. The corners of his mouth cracked open as he revealed a genial smile and whispered to the die in his hand, Here, let me treat you to a concert. The window of the washroom was very high, preventing sufficient sunlight from shining in. It could only barely dispel the darkness, making everything seem gloomy. Klein moved the die of probability in his right hand to the old black eye, and suddenly, it shook. Then, he threw the item into the other side of the wash basin. The milky white die rolled a few times before finally stopping with 4 red dots pointing up. Klein held back his unobvious smile and took a step to the side and picked up the die of probability again. He lowered his head and said in a gentlemanly manner, You don't wish to listen to it? Let's do this. Give me an answer. 6 represents cooperation, while everything else represents a rejection. With that said, he threw the die of probability up and reached out to catch it. The milky white die fell straight down and rapidly rolled, showing 6 red dots. Very good, Klein praised with a chuckle. After throwing the old black eye back above the grey fog, he turned to open the door to the washroom and slowly walked to the living room. Under Darkwill's and Harry's gaze, which was filled with anticipation, worry, curiosity, and puzzlement, he suddenly stopped and threw the die of probability out. No, no, Darkwill and the owl cried out at the same time, afraid that a score of 3 points and below would happen. The latter subconsciously flew out to distance itself from the fatty, who might be struck by lightning. With a crisp tinkle, the milky white die rolled on the coffee table several times before fixing itself at 2 points. Just as the colour in Darkwill's face drained, the die languidly rolled and fixed itself on 4. For the next 12 hours, it will be relatively quiet. Klein calmly sat down and began enjoying his breakfast, which had long turned cold. He really had a solution. Darkwill lowered his body and stared at the strange die on the coffee table. After nearly a minute, he couldn't help but extend his hand and throw the die, managing to roll a 6. Just as his palm left, the die moved by itself to 4. How magical what method did Gemon Sparrow actually use? Did he really SHT and soak the die inside? Darkwill decided to accept the outcome and stop thinking of the reason. Otherwise, he suspected that he would end up vomiting. Looking up at Gemon Sparrow, who was calmly spreading butter on his bread, Darkwill suddenly felt that with just a promise and £1,000 to hire a bodyguard at this level was extremely worth it. He can definitely be ranked at the same level as any pirate admiral. If a tycoon were to encounter a situation like mine, they wouldn't hesitate to hire him with half their wealth. Thankfully, I only paid £300. The rest will be borne by teacher and the others. Darkwill felt relieved when he realized that he didn't need to worry about the dice random rolling for the next 12 hours. He couldn't help but stand up and stretch his back. He walked to the window and opened the tightly shut window to see the sparse clouds scattered across the clear skies. The endless azure blue sky stirred as it reflected the bright sunlight like it had countless golden fragments scattered in it. This energized Darkwill as he felt a burden be lifted from his chest. Unlike Backland, which will only become warm at the end of February, the Rorsted archipelago was no longer plagued by the cold. Life had returned to this area. Facing the sea and the blooming of flowers in warm spring, Klein, who had finished his bread, walked to a spot behind Darkwill and felt like he was an animal who had awoken from hibernation. He didn't recite the poem that flashed past his mind, as firstly, it didn't suit Gemon Sparrow's persona, and secondly, it would probably make Darkwill reflect over Emperor Cell's poetic talent. Until the evening, the dice still didn't roll, but the weather had changed. Strong winds howled as dark clouds gathered. A storm was brewing. This was the most common danger at sea. Even if one took a safe sea route which had been traversed by others, one would occasionally encounter similar situations. It just wasn't as terrifying. Klein looked at the tall waves in the dark sky, and he felt as though the ship was cruising through a mountain valley. By the sides were tall dark blue cliffs that could topple down at any moment. The intense pressure made a mid-sequence beyond her like him feel repressed. He even wished to pray to God, hoping that the liner would cruise through the storm safely. It's no wonder sailors, pirates, and merchants who live on the sea for extended periods of time can't help but respect the law of storms. They would more or less believe in him. Klein sighed in silence. Although he didn't believe the storm that wasn't that powerful could bury a liner which was powered by both sails and steam engines, he still attached caution to the matter by praying to his alternate identity, sea god called Virtue. He was afraid that the die of probability would suddenly go crazy during the storm and roll a 1, causing the ship to sink to the bottom of the sea. Therefore, he decided to make preemptive precautions. Klein did believe Snake of Fate would accept Septine's judgment that the die of probability would be quiet for 12 hours after the first intimidation act, but this was without any additional conditions. He believed that it was more likely that a sealed artifact with living characteristics would deal with situations like a person instead of rules. Hence, he had to take precautions for any troubles it might cause. Stealing a glance at Darkwill and the owl who were looking somewhat uneasy due to the storm, Klein calmly said, I'll take a nap. Continue watching the die. Take turns and do not relax. All right. Watching Gemon Sparrow enter the master bedroom, Darkwill walked to the side of the coffee table and sat down. As he stared at the die, he asked Harry, What thoughts do you have now? Harry flew around and mumbled, Why am I not a petrel? In the master bedroom, Klein went above the grey fog and summoned the sea god scepter from the junk pile. He held the scepter with blue gems embedded at the top and quickly replied to his prayer. Klein didn't expend too much of his spirituality to calm the storm. This was firstly because they weren't too far from the surrounding seas of the Rorsted archipelago. Such an obvious and exaggerated supernatural phenomenon was easily able to attract the attention of Sea King Gentgasman, who shared the same domain, or the storm priests on the ships. Secondly, he had to conserve strength to deal with the die of probability. What he did was simple. He augmented the ship with layers of beyonder effects, allowing it to cruise through the storm stably without any risk of capsizing. Towards a sequence 5 or 6 beyond or below the rank of demigod, to do something similar to a liner which had hundreds of people on board required plenty of preparations and a complicated ritual. It was only possible by exhausting them, but to a sea god of this domain, it was all simple and easy. A demigod already has inklings of a god. Klein sighed and threw the scepter back into the junk pile, before silently disappearing from above the grey fog. In the time that followed, the ship bobbed up and down like a leaf in the wind, but no matter how terrifying or towering the dark blue waves were, nothing happened to it until the end of the storm. At 4 p.m. on Thursday. Backland, Williams Street. Force Wall once again arrived here by carriage. She didn't sit in the coffee shop again. Instead, she strolled down the street and observed the pedestrians and surrounding buildings. She also took note of figures with special traits as material for her novel. There really are a lot of foreigners. They're still mainly from Fisak and Intis. Hey, one of them is a barbaric and stocky white bear, while the other is a colourful, ostentatious rooster. Force chuckled silently to herself. At this moment, she came to the middle of Williams Street, where there was an abandoned chapel. Withered vines crawled over its walls, and grey stones were strewn everywhere. With the intention to not waste Mr. World's payment, Force deliberately approached it to check for any abnormalities. She circled around the chapel without discovering anything. Following that, she entered and avoided the disgusting shit and rotten things, and she quickly observed every corner. Suddenly, her gaze came to a stop as she frowned bit by bit. In a particular corner of the half-collapsed ruin, the ground had been dug up by someone. The pit wasn't too big or deep, and there were remnant traces of it being dug with fingers. This should be considered an abnormality, right? Force cautiously retreated and didn't do a detailed investigation. After walking through all of Williams Street, she immediately returned home and organized the abnormality and material she jotted down together. She then sacrificed it to Mr. Fool and asked him to hand it over to the world. Force didn't conceal anything she saw, even if they didn't seem to have any superficial problems. This was because she knew very well that any abnormality would be judged by the world, and not by herself, who didn't understand the situation. In the ancient palace above the fog, Klein immediately began reading the report Miss Magician had submitted. That abandoned chapel has signs of being dug up. The previous digging attempts had been dealt with by me and Miss Sharon, who would dig it up again. Rafter Pound, the descendant of the Tudor family. He nearly died from the evil spirit's possession. Without any helpers, it's unlikely he would take further risks. Who could it be? Klein thought for a moment, but he couldn't lock onto a suspect. All he could do was continue reading. While he read the notes written in a beautiful language, he acutely noticed a point. There are many foreigners on this street. They are mainly from Fisak and Intis. It wasn't like the back when I went to Williams Street. Did a Fisak or Intis company recently open there? Fisak, Intis. Klein ruminated over the two countries' names when he suddenly recalled something. The royal family of the Fisak Einhorn, the Einhorn family, and Intis former royal family, the Soren family, are both in control of the Hunter pathway, which is also the Red Priest pathway. It was two of the blood types which the evil spirit had designated as being capable of removing the seal. Together with the Medici family's descendants which had been destroyed at Banzi Harbour, the three factions which held control over the Red Priest pathway are involved. Banzi Harbour was destroyed, causing the Medici families beyond the characteristic to use some magical connection to contact the evil spirit who's suspected to be Red Angel. Hence, the members of the Einhorn and Soren families were attracted. No, that's not realistic. If the Church of Storms didn't discover any beyond the characteristics, they definitely would have noticed a problem in this. Another reason, the evil spirit is using another method to attract people from the Einhorn and Soren families. What all did it go through in order to do so? The number of people who know of the evil spirit's existence is only a handful, me, Miss Sharon, as well as amidst his racing thoughts, Klein suddenly thought of a possibility. It was Rafter Pound, the descendant of the Tudor family who had previously been possessed by the evil spirit. He had unknowingly become a slave of the evil spirit. He had secretly helped it spread the news. And the evil spirit had sought me and Miss Sharon's help to numb us into thinking that we are the only ones who can rescue it. For this, it didn't mind betraying its descendants. Klein was alarmed as he felt like he had been fooled by the evil spirit. The endless grey fog hung silently before a light scraping noise on the bronze table sounded. Klein changed his seating posture and began placing more weight on the details regarding the evil spirit. He was more and more convinced that Miss Sharon and himself had neglected the possibility of something happening to Rafter Pound. This is beyond the power of the Red Priest pathway, conspiracist. Furthermore, this is even closer to a common fraud. There's only the use of supernatural powers in the details. Therefore, even if I had arrived at the mysterious space above the grey fog, I would passively have my senses fooled. I would have only discovered the problem by proactively considering and analysing the situation. If it wasn't for Mr. Azai, who knew of the evil spirit suspected to be the dead Red Angel Medici, I wouldn't have realised this problem. Nor would I have hired Miss Magician to seek out any abnormalities on Williams Street. After a few minutes of contemplation, Klein conjured a pen and paper, preparing to use divination to confirm his theories. After deliberating for a moment, he finally penned the sentence for the dream divination, Baronet Rafter Pound's current situation. After putting down his dark red fountain pen, Klein held a piece of paper with the divination statement and leaned back in his chair. He first recalled the information he had regarding Rafter Pound before closing his eyes, chanting silently, and entering cogitation. Klein's thoughts rapidly calmed down as he quickly entered the dream state. In a grey world, disconnected scenes flashed past before finally fixating on Unit 29 on Civil House Street. Inside the warm activity room, Rafter Pound was dressed in coat and pajamas, holding a wine cup with red liquid. He was standing silently by the window, looking at the Backland Police Station headquarters diagonally across the street. This baronet had grey sideburns and puffy eye sockets that were tainted with blackish green colours. The wrinkles on his forehead and the corners of his eyes and mouth were so pronounced that it exceeded what someone in his 40s should look like. His pupils were dilated in a very serious manner, but they were abnormal. His cheeks were flushed red as he had a furtive smile. He looked slightly abnormal compared to the last time Klein met him. Indeed, something is wrong with him. Klein left the dream and began considering how he could deal with the evil spirit. Without a doubt, he had his usual train of thought for such matters. Under the situation where he was unable to contact Miss Sharon, his first reaction was to report the matter. But how should it be reported? Klein considered it seriously and conjured the world's figure and made him pray. Through a reliable channel, pass this information to the Church of the Evernight Goddess and the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. The information is, high-level spies from Fisak and Intis are gathered at Williams Street for unknown motives. Reward of £100. This was the explanation Klein thought of after repeated consideration. Directly revealing the King of Angels, Red Priest, the Medici family, or the Tudor dynasty's ruin would indeed garner the attention of the churches and military. But it would also easily make Miss Magician, who reported the matter, to be targeted by the official organizations. There were huge risks involved. Not only was using high-level spies from Fisak and Intis gathered at Williams Street relatively milder, something which ordinary beyonders had a chance of noticing, but it was also something that would make the churches and the military wary. They would send out the corresponding experts to employ the most effective methods. As for the subsequent fruits of the investigations, it was all thanks to their contributions and had nothing to do with the reporting party. Klein had considered getting Mr. Azai to help, but he ultimately chose to abandon the thought. This was because the evil spirit was suspected to be a king of angels and was very dangerous. Mr. Azai, who was still in the stage of recovering, might not be able to deal with it. After some thought, Klein turned the conjured scene into a stream of light and transmitted it to the crimson star representing the magician. Backland, Chilwood Borough. When Force received the response from Mr. World, she was taken aback. Those are high-level spies from Fisak and Intis. She exclaimed to herself, believing that there was no way she could have inferred something like that with the information she had provided. However, she quickly felt at ease, believing that the reason why Mr. World had suspicions of abnormalities in William Street was precisely because he had received the corresponding intel high-level spies. Once he confirmed the appearances of people from Fisak and Intis, it was easy for him to make such a conclusion. Pass this information to the Church of Evernight and the Church of Steam. Isn't that a euphemistic way of saying report? Unfortunately, I won't be able to watch from the sideline, or I'm sure a great show would unfold. Force wasn't a stranger to reporting matters. After all, her housemate and good friend was a bounty hunter. She quickly had an idea, deciding to hand the matter of reporting the intel to the experienced Xio. When she came out of the bedroom, she saw Xio sitting on a sofa. She was flipping through documents about her target, raising her hand to grab at her messy blonde hair from time to time and appearing extremely serious. Force casually picked up an item to embellish her motives and came over to the sofa. She handed over the item. Here, have a piece of cake. Xio glanced at the cake slathered with a layer of cream. Without losing focus, she raised her hand to grab it. At this moment, Force flicked her wrist, and the cake in her palm had turned into a golden decorative flower. Surprised, she asked with a smile. Xio couldn't help but roll her eyes. Stop your performance. I prefer food. All right, I have a matter for you to do. 70 pounds. Force smiled as she sat down. After first dealing with the evil spirit's matter, Klein returned to the real world and held a ritual in passing. He brought the radio transceiver, which had been placed above the grey fork for several days, back to his first-class master bedroom. He lay in bed and used cogitation to recover his energy until he was awoken by the tapping sounds. When Klein opened his eyes, the crimson moonlight had already shone in, blanketing the dim room like a veil, as well as the radio transceiver which was automatically spewing out illusory white paper. This really feels like a horror film. A shame it's connected to a magic mirror without any moral integrity or bottom line. Klein sat up and walked over. He saw lines of Loanese on the illusory white paper. Honorable existence above the spirit world, your loyal and humble servant, Arrows, has arrived and would like to greet you. Do you have something you would like to test me on? Look at this, look. This is what I call smooth talking. This is what a professional is like. In that instant, Klein really wished to pull Darkwill into the room to witness the magic mirror's art of communication. I clearly have questions to ask it, but it becomes a situation of me testing it. And it even threw in a question. Klein controlled the curling of his mouth as he replied in a deep voice, yes. Please speak. The ignorant and limited Arrows is ready. Amidst the tapping sounds, the illusory paper no longer produced Loanese, but instead produced a fawning smiley face. This is already the emergence of emoticons. This fellow evolves really quickly. Klein directly asked, where can I obtain a mystical item which can steal the beyond the powers of others? The tapping sounds suddenly became intense as the illusory white paper quickly produced scenes like a screenshot from a movie. There were places which Klein was familiar with, such as Tingen City, St. Helena Cathedral's Kenneth Gate, the black-haired, green-eyed, handsome poet, Leonard Mitchell, the middle-aged man who sat on a sofa smiling at the noble ladies opposite him, and a young arrogant lady who was loitering in the sewers. There were a total of 12 scenes, and finally a line of Loanese text appeared. These are the ones that you can easily or conveniently acquire one from. There are a lot more, but they are either very complicated or troublesome, or they range at the highest levels which I cannot see clearly. Not bad. He actually knows to help me filter. This is a fantasy and mystical version of Google. Klein gently nodded and said, despite knowing the answer, it's your turn to ask. You have already answered. Amidst the tapping, Arrows' unsurprising answer appeared on the illusory white paper. Klein chuckled inwardly and asked, where will Leonard Mitchell be staying for the time being? The tapping sounds became intense again as one scene after another appeared before Klein's eyes. It was a famous landmark in Backland, a towering Gothic bell tower with a bell of order hanging above. There was a road sign on the road with the words Pinster Street. It was Unit 7 along a row of terrace houses. In it, there was the extremely suave Leonard Mitchell wearing a black coat and red gloves. He was Klein's poet friend who was reading through the dossiers of Lanivas and Kapheim. This fellow is in Backland, and he's investigating the Lanivas and Kapheim cases. What the hell? The corners of Klein's mouth twitched slightly as he carefully thought of the clues he left behind in those two cases. The only clue is that Detective Sherlock Moriarty is involved in the two cases. If Leonard enters Daisy's dream, he should discover this point. But I already kept a beard and had a pretty good disguise back then. It's unlikely that he can recognize me in the rather blurry scene in the dream and portraits. As long as he doesn't recognize me, it doesn't matter. What has problems with Sherlock Moriarty have to do with me, Gem and Sparrow? Klein retracted his thoughts and memorized Leonard Mitchell's current residence. 7 Pinster Street, Backland. He planned on entrusting the Moon Emlyn White to visit Leonard Mitchell the day after, tomorrow, and use the badge of the Hermits of Fate to purchase a mystical item. I hope my dear poet friend has additional items to spare. If not, the price will definitely be at a premium. Klein tersely answered and said to the radio transceiver, it's your turn to ask. He was honestly curious as to what Arrows would ask this time. Amidst the clacking sounds, the radio transceiver spewed out new illusory paper. On it was a question composed in Loanese, Great Master, Leonard Mitchell has a huge secret. Do you wish to know? This can also be considered a question. Klein raised his head in amusement and surprise as he looked at the crimson moon which was silently illuminating the dark sea. Soon, he honestly gave an answer. Yes, amidst the clacking sounds, the radio transceiver spewed out a brand new piece of illusory white paper under the crimson moonlight in the dim environment. Inside Leonard Mitchell resides an angel from the Zarost family. He once changed my question. Angel, there's an angel residing in Leonard's body. An angel from the 4th epoch Zarost family. Although Klein was mentally prepared to hear an incredible secret, he was still shocked by what Arrows divulged. He was deeply concerned and surprised as well. An angel referred to Beyonders at sequence 102, making them rather close to the state of the true god. They had all sorts of mystical characteristics, and they could even influence low sequence Beyonders of the same pathway to a certain extent and range. They were mighty figures who stood at the pinnacle of the real world. In the various churches, only their popes, pontiffs, chief shepherds, as well as certain legendary ascetics were grounded angels. Therefore, Klein believed that being latched onto by a parasite of this level wasn't a good thing. In the Dark Second Epoch, the angels all had their divine names, and they were subsidiaries to the ancient gods. I haven't indirectly or directly interacted with many angels, Blasphemer Aemon, Calamity Queen Kahinum, the evil spirit suspected to be Red Angel Medisai, Tail Devourer Ouroboros as described by Little Sun, Miracle Invoker Zaratal from Rassel's diaries, son of the creator, Adam, Hermes who cannot be confirmed if he's an angel or not. Snake of Fate, Widow Septin, who's still inside his mother's womb. Apart from the last two, the others appear to be very evil. Even the words they leave behind might make the reader go crazy or lose control, will my dear poet ultimately end up as a sacrificial item of this angel parasite. This can explain why he thinks of himself as the protagonist of the play, the special one, and he was willing to help me hide my secret as the Roast family is in control of the Marauder pathway, which is the pathway that can steal the beyond the powers of others. That's why Leonard was able to find and participate in the gathering of the Hermits of Fate. It's no wonder he offered to use Blood Vessel Thief. It's because he has a grandpa want to help him. He was able to instantly steal Megos' most potent power. Hey, what are Hermits of Fate? They're just a bunch of thieves and frauds. At best, the target of their theft and fraud is that of time and fate. In short, my dear poet's grandpa isn't a good person. I had to find the chance to warn him, but here comes the problem. They're always together. Any warning will only expedite the problem. Klein's thoughts raced, but he ultimately failed to come up with an option he can act upon. All he could do was temporarily shelve the matter and plan on asking Mr. Azarkan Snake of Mercury, Widow Septin, to see if they had any solutions. In those few minutes, he even thought of using Blasphemer Aemon. To put it simply, it was to divulge information to the son of the creator that the angel from the Zarost family was residing in Leonard Mitchell's body, getting him to eat up the parasite. According to what Klein knew, the Aemon family supported the Tudor Empire during the Fourth Epoch, while the Zarost family belonged to the Solomon Empire, making the two enemies. Furthermore, according to the law of beyond characteristics conservation, powerhouses from the same pathway would have greater conflicts the higher their sequence was. This was akin to the battle between the two snakes of Mercury. Unfortunately, this solution was restricted by reality and was ultimately abandoned by Klein. This was because he didn't know where to find Blasphemer Aemon. Secondly, he was afraid that the battle at the level of angels would directly destroy Leonard Mitchell. And thirdly, a powerful Aemon might be a very bad and serious matter. I'll first get Emlyn to attempt the transaction and observe the actual situation. I can decide on what to do when I know more. Klein retracted his thoughts and said to the radio transceiver which was connected to our roads, asked your question. The clacking of the radio transceiver became increasingly brisker as the illusory white paper was gently spewed out. No, there's no need. This is an addendum to my question, which doesn't need to abide by the rules. Great Master, I sense a special item outside your room, but I am unable to see through it. Can you tell me what it is? This magic mirror is impressive. It seems to be able to see everything. It just suffers from interference when it deals with high-level matters, as though there's a mosaic. Klein calmly replied, die of probability. Amidst the taping sounds, Arrow presented new words on the illusory piece of white paper. So it's that thing, Great Master. You can ask your question. Klein thought for a moment before saying, what do you have to mention regarding the die of probability? At this point in time, the radio transceiver seemed to brighten up and no longer looked as gloomy as before. The speed at which illusory white paper spewed out slowed down. It's a fellow that's especially petty and bears grudges. Master, you have to quickly give it to someone else. It's an item formed from the uniqueness of the Wheel of Fortune. You can give it to any other snake of fate and they will be very grateful. In short, it's not suitable to be your servant. The aura is dissipating. Your loyal and humble servant, Arrows, has no choice but to leave. Finally, let me praise you once again, my great master, the ruler above the spirit world. Bye-bye. Uniqueness, the die of probability, is actually the uniqueness of the monster pathway. This is the first time I'm encountering a so-called uniqueness. It really is terrifying that can digitize the entire real world. The monster pathway is also called the Wheel of Fortune pathway. Sequence 0 is the Wheel of Fortune. Klein looked at the radio transceiver which had returned to normal, and he temporarily reined in his thoughts. He didn't harbor any greed towards the die of probability. This was because it wasn't part of the seer pathway, and it came with extremely terrifying negative side effects. He was also afraid that, with time, this die which bore grudges will attract tail Devourer Ouroboros over. Even if this thing can be isolated and sealed when placed above the grey fog, there's a high chance of it digitizing the entire mysterious space. In the future, the tarot gatherings might end up becoming a tabletop role-playing game. Klein had never come into contact with items of this level before, so he was unable to determine what would happen if he were to throw the die of probability above the grey fog. He decided to continue intimidating the die, and he would successfully send it to Orabi Island, where there would be life school of thought members who had the means to see it. As for the problem of the mission exceeding the payment he would receive, he didn't mind it. This was because the greatest benefit he would gain was the friendship of the Snake of Fate, Widow Septin. Backland, Harvest Church. Emlyn White held a strange badge which was the size of an eyeball and chuckled inwardly. The world sure is long-winded. Isn't it just finding a talk named Leonard Mitchell at Pinster Street in Northborough? He even specially emphasized that the person has a secret, and that there's a high chance of me being pulled into a dream. This is showing doubt in my abilities. Emlyn stood up and changed into a tailcoat and white shirt. He then turned his head to look out the window. Hey, he has a secret, while I have mine. I dare bet that Lord Nibs or other earls are secretly watching me. If anything were to happen, they will definitely provide me with help to a certain degree. Being pulled into a dream, Emlyn contemplated for a few seconds before using the materials which were rich in spirituality to concoct a blue medicine. Putting away the bottle and medicine, he picked up a silk top hat and walked out of the break room. After bidding farewell to Bishop Utravsky, he left the Harvest Church. It was still morning, but Backland's sky was gloomy. There was a faint fog that spread like water. Emlyn squinted his eyes and wore his hat, murmuring to himself, the sunlight is a little blinding. He hailed a rental carriage and went straight for the steam metro station. He spent 6 pence on a first-class ticket to Northborough. This saved him a lot more time than heading straight there. About 40 minutes later, he arrived at his destination and stood outside the door of 7 Pinster Street. Emlyn politely rang the doorbell and patiently waited for a minute. Just as he was about to write a note and stuff it into the hole beneath the door to schedule a better time for a visit, he suddenly heard languid footsteps approaching. Doesn't sound like a servant. Emlyn nodded indiscernibly and took out the medicine he had concocted in advance and cleanly drank it. Then, he watched the door open and saw a black-haired, green-eyed man appear before him. He was dressed in homewear, a white shirt and black trousers. His shirt was untucked, allowing it to flutter gently in the wind. Amidst his suaveness were hints of uninhibited freedom. Although he's a believer of evernight, I have to say that his looks are barely comparable to a sanguine. Emlyn took off his hat and gently raised his chin. Good morning. Are you Mr. Leonard Mitchell? Leonard frowned indiscernibly as he looked at the handsome, red-eyed gentleman. He raised his hand to cover his mouth and indifferently yawned. You are a visitor. I have something I would like to seek your help on. Emlyn didn't reveal his identity as he smiled with a rather obvious arrogance. This attitude gave Leonard a baffling sense of familiarity. It was as though he had seen his former self, the person who always thought of himself as being the most special, the protagonist of this era. He cleared his throat and said, I'm only an ordinary citizen. I do not accept missions. If you have any issues, then you can find the private detective. Emlyn White smiled and said, "This matter is something only you can complete." He looked to his sides and continued, "I wish to purchase a mystical item that can steal the beyond the powers of others." Leonard's eyes focused as he asked in a deep voice, "Who are you?" At this moment, Emlyn didn't immediately answer. Instead, he surveyed his surroundings and clicked his tongue with a smile. Impressive. I nearly failed to realize that I had been pulled into a dream. He wasn't in a rush to leave as he took out the small badge he received from the world in front of Leonard Mitchell's solemn expression. Leonard took a glance as his expression eased slightly. He cocked his head slightly and paused for a few seconds. Silently, Emlyn White saw the scene around him rapidly shatter and vanish like shattering glass. Leonard sneered and pointed inside the house. "Let's talk inside." Upon hearing Leonard Mitchell's invitation, Emlyn didn't show any fear. He held his top hat and wore a subtle smile before entering the house without any qualms. He didn't take off his coat, as a potions professor often brought several supplementary items. It wouldn't look pleasant once the concealment of these items was gone. Emlyn sat down with his starched tailcoat, leaning back into the support as he leisurely said, "Actually, there's no need to go through the trouble. If you have it, name the price. Otherwise, just frankly say so. Of course, I'm very certain you have one." He chuckled as his bright red eyes reflected Leonard Mitchell's figure that didn't mind the tidiness of his G-cup. "The feeling of me knowing you have a secret, with you not knowing anything about me, left Emlyn extremely pleased as he felt a strong sense of superiority." Leonard used his fingers to comb his raven black hair and casually sat on the chair opposite Emlyn. He didn't show any panic or puzzlement as he said with a smile, "At the very least, I need to know who wants it. Perhaps it's me, or perhaps it's my friend." Emlyn tipped his chin as he smiled gently. Leonard squinted his eyes as he cocked his head, as though in thought. Finally, he laughed. "All right, since you've already taken out that badge, I'll answer you frankly. I do have a mystical item that can be used to steal the beyond the powers of others, but I only have that one item. If you wish to buy it, £7,000. No negotiation. £7,000? A mystical item of this kind is that expensive?" Although he didn't have to pay for it, Emlyn was still shocked. He nearly failed to maintain his bearing as a sanguine. He automatically converted how much money that could be used to exchange for dolls and doll dresses. After 2 seconds of thought, Emlyn revealed a smile and said, "I'll consider it. I'll answer you in 2 days. "Sure." Leonard curled the corners of his lips. After leaving 7 Pinster Street, Emlyn hired a rental carriage as though nothing had happened as he headed for the steam metro station in North Borough, before heading back to the bridge at South Borough. Taking off his hat, he looked back at the street which had carriages and pedestrians passing through. Emlyn chuckled and took a step into the Harvest Church. In between a tree and a black street lamp, an inconspicuous shadow suddenly moved, revealing the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard Mitchell. His appearance was silent, but it didn't garner the attention of any pedestrians. Someone from the Church of Earth Mother. Leonard frowned slightly as he muttered to himself. He paused for 2 seconds before leaving Rose Street, where the Harvest Church was situated. £7,000? Why doesn't he just go rob a bank? Above the grey fog, Klein, who had received the feedback from Emlyn, merely blurted out. As Gem and Sparrow, he had previously said something similar, but the two situations and the mood was completely different. Using the bounty of the Golden Dream's third mate, Flowery Bowtie Johnson, as a reference, Klein inferred that a similar mystical item was worth about £5,000. Even if there was a premium, it would have maxed out at £6,000. Who knew that Leonard Mitchell would directly ask for £7,000? Could it be an item left behind from a high-sequence Beyonder, making the act of stealing Beyonder powers just one of its effects? No, if that's really the case, the price would start from £10,000, my dear poet. Why didn't I know you was a profiteering merchant? You clearly exhibit a free and easy demeanor and showed no interest in money. Klein couldn't help but sigh. Since he had a clue and saw a glimmer of hope and how it was something that could be resolved with money, Klein didn't wish to seek out other channels to prevent any mishaps from happening. He quickly calculated his wealth and discovered that was an acceptable price. Including the £300 advance from the apothecary, the £5,400 bounty from Ormton, and the cash I got from the bodies, and subtracting the £200 to be paid to Miss Magician, I have a total of £12,767 in cash and 5 gold coins. This isn't including my 3 soldi and 8 pence in change. In addition, Miss Justice will pay the £2,000 she owes me before the end of the week, as well as the £1,800 for the psychiatrist characteristic. I'm actually richer than I thought I was. Even in Bagland, I can be considered a tycoon. Klein inhaled and didn't hesitate any further. He made the cash fly out from the junk pile and land on the table. He carefully counted £7,500 in cash and placed them aside, £7,000 for the mystical item, and £500 for Emlyn's hazardous pay. Sigh, after going through all the effort to go past 10,000, more than half of it will be gone in an instant. Klein conjured the world and made him pose in a praying manner to inform Emlyn that there were no problems with going through with the transaction. 15 minutes later, a ritual was to be held to receive the bestowment from Mr. Fool. In addition, Klein also made the world warn Emlyn to not be in a rush to complete the deal after getting the cash. He had to wait until tomorrow. This was because he was afraid that the angel from the Zarost family inside Leonard Mitchell would sense the grey fog's aura on the cash. He wanted an airing process, just like back when he gave Emlyn the badge. 15 minutes later, Klein glanced at the cash pile which had shrunk by more than half and sighed before returning to the real world. It was already 10:40 on a Friday. They were about 8 hours from Orabai Island. It's time to intimidate the die of probability again, Klein muttered, held the ritual, and brought out the iron cigar case which contained the all-black eye. He guessed that Dark Will would suspect something, so he deliberately brought the die to the washroom to deal with it. Seeing the die of probability calm down once again, Klein quickly dealt with the all-black eye and the iron cigar case. After heaving a long sigh of relief, he did a silent count of the time. It should be enough to last until Dark Will hands it to the contact. There's no need to deal with it again. With this in mind, Klein began to consider another problem with a certain degree of concern. The all-black eye has appeared in front of the true creator before, and it was his mental corruption. To take it out once every few hours might cause him to lock onto me, allowing him to send powerhouses to seek me out. However, it was only 1 or 2 minutes each time, so the problem isn't that serious. Even if he senses it, their estimate of the area wouldn't be too precise. Sigh, when it involves the true creator, there's no way to determine things with divination. I can only raise my guard. Thankfully, this is the last time, and it will take only about 8 hours to reach our destination. Why am I raising flags for myself? Pyre. I wasn't thinking of anything. Klein picked up the die of probability and returned to the living room and saw the chubby apothecary slumped on the reclining chair, looking completely exhausted. As for the owl, Harry, it looked like it was brimming with energy, as though it didn't need any rest. These are the different traits that different creatures gain from taking the same potion. At the very least, Miss Justice has never mentioned that she doesn't need sleep. It's a uniqueness that comes about because of an owl's biological makeup. Sigh, I don't know much about owls. Indeed, I'm just a keyboard warrior who is only a jack of all trades. Klein sat on the sofa and placed the milky white die into the ring box and patiently waited for evening to arrive when the ship was scheduled to dock. Time ticked by as the sun gradually set in the west. At this point in time, Klein, who had his eyes closed, suddenly sat up, having sensed an extreme danger befall the area. It had exceeded Aesir's spiritual intuition and the clown's intuition for danger. It seemed to stem from the formless grey fog which strangely rippled around him. An enemy, tail devourer Robo Rose, or the Aurora Order Saint. Klein opened his eyes as he began considering countermeasures with an abnormally serious expression. Any mistake in a time such as this would require him to consider matters of being resurrected. As for Dark Will and Harry, there was absolutely no way for them to be spared. In the beginning, he hoped that the visitor could only vaguely sense a general area and might not find him or the die of probability. However, when he considered how he was on a ship with no one around on the sea, it wasn't too hard to lock onto a target. The problems would only become worse when that happened, with giving up being the only choice. Above the liner, space was suddenly torn open as an invisible door filled with complicated symbols appeared. Two pale hands reached out from the door and suddenly pulled backwards, allowing his entire body to walk out. He wore a black bonnet and the classic dark robe, a favorite among elders. However, he didn't look past 40. His brown hair was slightly curled, which seemed abnormally hard. Countless illusory images darted across his dark eyes, as though layers after layer of chaotic worlds were hidden within. As Klein's sense of danger intensified, just a change in his expression frightened Dark Will and Harry enough for them to freeze. He didn't hesitate as he followed the plans he had made for such situations. He leaned forward and picked up the die of probability. Determine the outcome of the malefic visitor who just arrived. I want 1 point, Klein said in a deep and soft voice, and he threw out the milky white die. He subconsciously prayed to the goddess, hoping that the die which had recently been intimidated was obedient enough and played a meaningful role. Meanwhile, he appeared extremely calm, to prevent the die from sensing his anxiety and take the opportunity to cause trouble. As the die of probability rolled several times while producing clinking sounds, it fixed at the blood red 1 point. Above the liner, the black-robed man, who didn't look 40, had the entire liner reflected within his eyes. He emanated his spirituality and scanned the surroundings. He extended his hand to grab the space in front of him as he suddenly pulled a nearly invisible door. The powerhouse stepped in and vanished from the spot. Inside the first-class cabin, Klein immediately felt the danger distancing itself from him. He couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. He looked at the die of probability on the coffee table and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. If this die didn't have such a negative side effect and could be utilized to its full extent, it would be a divine artifact. As expected of a grade 0 sealed artifact. As expected of the uniqueness of the monster pathway. Only at this point in time did Dark Will find his courage again as he carefully asked, what just happened? Klein maintained his posture and calmly replied, there's no need for you to know. I understand. The more I know, the greater the danger I'll be in. Dark Will wiped the cold sweat from his face. There weren't any more accidents in the next few hours. After the sun went below the horizon and the sky became completely dark, Klein finally saw a towering lighthouse appear not too far away.